We now have a panel. The Best Supporting Character Award goes to, and with that, I hand it off to not a supporting character, a main character, Connie Willis.
Hi, everybody. This is our Best Supporting Character panel. And today, it's usually Sherlock Holmes, Harry Potter, Batman, Frodo, Mr. Darcy, Oliver Twist, Robinson Crusoe, Mickey Mouse, Hamlet, Don Quixote, and Doctor Who get all the press. But today we're here to celebrate Dr. Watson, Hermione, Robin, Sam Gamgee, Mr. Bingley, the Artful Dodger, Friday, Minnie Mouse, Horatio, Sancho Panza, and all of Doctor Who's companions, plus a whole bunch of other supporting characters. And I want us to start by having the panel introduce themselves. I'll start. I'm Connie Willis. I'm moderating this panel, and I write science fiction, have written it for a long time. My newest novel is, which is just finished, is called The Road to Roswell. Okay, John?
My name's John Barnes. I used to be a fairly prolific science fiction writer, and still am writing, just haven't finished anything or been happy with what I had, but I've got a couple of novels that are somewhere in the stage between ready to go and ready to throw away, and it's moving along. I haven't stopped writing. I just have not wanted to put some of the stuff that I'm writing out yet. And that's let's see. I taught a bunch of different subjects. These days, I primarily make my living as a data scientist, which means that I try to simultaneously please people while telling them the truth. And that's very, very similar to fiction writing anyway.
Okay. All right. Suzanne?
My name is Suzanne Palmer, and I will warn everybody that I have noisy birds behind me. And they were quiet all morning. So I was like, oh, they're being quiet today. I don't have to evict them. And the moment the Zoom started, they're chirping. So I'll keep myself muted when I'm not talking because they're annoying as all hell. I write science fiction and won a Hugo for a novelette called The Secret Life of Bots. My third novel, The Scavenger Door, with a really awesome spaceship on the cover, came out last Tuesday. And that's very exciting. And I was going to have a book party, but instead I'm going to have a hurricane. So
okay. So
that's me.
Where are you, Suzanne? Where are you?
I'm actually in New England, and which is sort of the odd man out for this convention. But my parents live in Albuquerque, and I've been trying to sort of coordinate visiting them with attending this convention for years. Yeah. And I was hoping this year was finally the year. I haven't seen my folks in 2 years now,
and then here
not quite. Sorry.
Yeah. So I said, and here came Henri to ruin your fun.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm dead bullseye out in Western Massachusetts for the hurricane. So that'll be exciting tomorrow.
Good luck. Okay. All right. And Betsy?
Well, I was just thinking, Suzanne, it's too bad you can't coordinate visiting your folks with hurricanes. I mean, you got no hurricanes in Albuquerque.
I know if I could bring you guys some rain out there, though, I would happily do so.
That'd be nice.
Get it. I'm Betsy James. Probably my biggest claim to fame at the moment is that my most recent novel, Road Souls, was finalist for the World Fantasy Award a couple of years ago.
Hey.
In 2017. I would say that I'm pretty earthbound. I think I always get classed as fantasy. I call it speculative fiction. It's probably more like magic realism. And I'm also a painter in galleries, and I teach 2 courses in writers' workshops in speculative fiction at in the Honors College at University of New Mexico, which is a blast. I get to play with 20-somethings.
All right. Okay, well, Betsy, we'll start with you then. Can you want to talk about who some of your favorite supporting characters are? And there are no limits on this panel. I mean, you can talk about science fiction, fantasy, movies, classics, whatever you want.
You are assuming that I have a memory or
know.
a long-term memory. I'm just
a supporting character that you like then.
Well, no, I'm going to open up a can of worms right now because I was thinking about this, that I don't think of characters as being supporting or non-supporting, that I think of them as being bits of a whole. So I'm gonna,
Okay, all right, Suzanne?
Yeah.
Oh, and I want to say one other thing, and that's that if people want to jump in, they can. We're set up so that you can, you don't have to wait unless you're muted, then you have to hit your unmute button. But feel free to jump in if you have a comment. Suzanne, you have a favorite supporting character?
I thought about this a lot. And, the obvious answer is like all the robots in the Star Wars movies.
True.
But I think, and this may be going down a bit of a rabbit hole, the absolute perfect supporting character is the cabbage seller in Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Okay.
Which I don't know if you folks have seen that series. It's an animated series. And there's all the main characters and there's a regular cast of supporting characters. But there's some poor guy trying to sell cabbages who appears in multiple episodes just long enough to have his cabbage cart get destroyed during whatever the main characters are up to. And it's sort of this running gag, but it's
Right.
perfect because it adds this element that carries through really the whole series is the poor cabbage guy. And the viewers immediately pick up on that. They're like, oh, that's the cabbage guy again. But he's so non-visible to the characters in the story.
Right.
And in some ways, I think that epitomizes sort of what you can do with non-main supporting characters to really drive your narrative in a way that doesn't necessarily change what the main characters are doing, but
Right.
it changes the very tone of the work.
Okay. Great. Okay, John, you were nodding.
There's a literary game that is great fun, which is identify the 3 literary characters that are the basic components of your personality. Who are you a blend of? And I always have the same answer for that. One of them is Sam Gamgee. One of them is Utterson the lawyer in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And at least half the people who've read it and even read it multiple times forget the whole story is seen through Utterson's eyes. And the third is Benjamin the donkey from Animal Farm, who exists mostly to come in and just say that life is going to go on as it always had, which is to say badly. Suddenly I identify with supporting characters. I think I'm naturally the guy that's there to swell a progress and not Prince Hamlet. And so I love the supporting characters very often, much more than I do the main ones.
Right. Yeah. And I think you bring up an important point that that supporting characters can fulfill lots of different roles. They're not all there for the same purpose. You mentioned the narrator in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. What did you say his name was?
Utterson the lawyer. And in fact,
Utterson.
the first page of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a characterization of Utterson, where you immediately can tell that he was raised in a rather cold Calvinist household, as I was. And that's part of why I identify with him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think people sometimes forget that the narrator telling the story is just as important as the characters are telling it about. Nick Carraway and The Great Gatsby is really, when you stop and think about it, the only sympathetic character in that entire novel. And so he's the one that, he's grounds you. He does all kinds of things. He's not just telling the story, but he's also reminding you of what the sane world looks like as you follow the adventures of these not quite sane people, these people who are, ambitious or obsessed or careless or evil or whatever. And he's
the last few pages of the book is Nick Carraway cleaning up the mess.
Yes, exactly.
Doing things like arranging funerals and finding people and to let them know that Gatsby has died and so forth.
Yeah, that I think he's a great character, and yet I would say a lot of people don't even remember his name or notice him. He's so unobtrusive, and that's true. I think also isn't Watson the person who tells the Sherlock Holmes stories?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So, can you think of any other narrators, Betsy?
Well, I'm thinking not of a narrator.
Oh, no, go ahead. Any direction you want.
Thinking of Jim in Huckleberry Finn. This isn't sci-fi,
Absolutely.
SF, but he's a counterbalance to, Huck is a really unreliable narrator, and Jim is reflecting the actual ethics of the book. So
yeah, Jim is also, I think that you have to have a sane center in a story. You have to have a character who represents, if not the reader in the story, represents at least the sane center. You see this in a lot of screwball comedies where there's Jimmy Stewart is frequently the sane center with madness progressing around him in all directions, and you have to have that, because otherwise things just fly off into pieces. Margaret Dumond in the Marx Brothers movies, she just stands there, literally the sane center, like this giant rock that's standing there and keeping things from just flying off in all directions and not doing a very good job of it. It's hard to control the Marx Brothers, but yeah. So Betsy, Suzanne, can you think of any good narrators or sane centers?
I was thinking of Robert Charles Wilson's Julian Comstock, which is a fantastic book that's entirely told by sort of the best friend of the main character. And he's, the main character is sort of an unreliable narrator. He's enough different from the reader that it's the narrator that bridges that gap. Because he's a pretty ordinary guy, other than having to be best friends with this person that's caught up in these huge world events. And I thought that was a really well done, picking. And as you said with Watson, if the Sherlock Holmes stories didn't have Watson, they would be a totally different thing. Even though Watson's not the main character, but it's from his point of view. Who else could you tell those stories from?
Right. And Sherlock's not going to tell him.
No.
He's not going to tell you anything.
And you wouldn't trust what he says either.
Right. So yeah. And one of the interesting things is, I think a lot of times narrators and the function of a lot of supporting characters is to do plot exposition for you. Obviously narrators do a ton of plot exposition, but we were watching Dirty Dancing the other night, and there's a character in there whose name is Billy, and he's the one who first introduces Baby to the Dirty Dancers and the staff and stuff. And I looked through this time I watched the movie just looking at Billy real sharply through the whole thing. And he does nothing except plot exposition. That's his job. He's on there and he's great at it. But he's the one who tells Baby how all the rules about the staff. And he's the one who tells her who's unreliable and who's not. And he's the one who tells her that the girl is the young woman's getting an abortion. And he's the one who tells her that the abortion got botched. And he's the one who tells her that she's doing better. And he's the one who tells her that the guy got fired. It's just amazing. And he does nothing else. He never really figures in any other way. Now that we're always told that's a bad thing, that your characters should not just exist to do plot exposition. And yet he's great and he's very unobtrusive. It's very natural and stuff. So how do you guys feel about supporting characters who do plot exposition?
Marlowe in Conrad's novels. there's a widespread argument among people who love Conrad whether Marlowe is just happens to be the name of the narrator in three of Conrad's best novels, Lord Jim, Heart of Darkness, and Youth. But Marlowe is the reason that all this stuff means anything.
Right.
I mean, because Conrad quite deliberately sets up what's really a chain of closely related and they're causally related events about an interesting character, but they don't add up to anything that looks very much like a traditional plot, except that Marlowe tells the story in some other order than chronological, and he is looking for what does all this mean at the core of it.
Right. He does a lot of ordinary plot exposition, who, what, when, where stuff, but he also does basically the theme and the meaning of the stories.
He kind of is the plot structure because, and also he walks in and out of the story. He's there is no fourth wall. There are scenes in which Marlowe is directly a witness. There are scenes in which he's talking to some other witness, and there are scenes where he's talking to the people he's telling the story to. Sometimes very improbably, Lord Jim is supposed to be told in a single night.
And wouldn't you say he's also the sane center?
Yeah, well, and the sane center who is constantly questioning his own sanity. It's
right.
The standard of are the standards that Marlowe has lived his life by the right standards? When you consider what happens to characters like Jim and Kurtz and so forth.
Yeah, somebody in the chat just said Sheriff Truman in the original Twin Peaks, as actor Michael Ontkean said in an interview, "I'm the designated driver," meaning the same character. I really like that. I like the idea of the designated driver, because especially in difficult to follow stories that are real convoluted or have an obscure meaning or whatever, you really need somebody, a guide, somebody leading you through the story and helping you to understand it. So Betsy, any comments on plot exposition for supporting characters?
Mostly it's just interesting because we so much say show, don't tell. And a character who is carrying the tell part, as long as it's not too heavy-handed, can be slipped in here and there, as you have described. It's kind of an end run around.
Right. Yeah. The show don't tell, I think, is always so interesting because it's not true. I mean, stories are full of things that we tell. If we showed everything, every book would be 1,000,000 pages long, and there are tons of stuff that we have to tell. You just can't tell, the things that should be shown, like big emotional moments and climaxes and things like that you can't afford to just tell. But there's lots and lots of stuff that you need to tell. And I always love, there's a scene in The Great Muppet Caper, and Miss Piggy is Diana Rigg's secretary. And Diana Rigg says, get my brother on the phone. He's so unreliable. He is just so difficult. He's always been a bad egg, and he's been in and out of trouble with the law. And I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. But, he is my brother. So I've had to give him a job here at the store. But I feel that it's really problematic because we have so many valuable jewels here. And I think that at any moment he might steal them, including the fabulous baseball diamond, which is this amazing jewel, et cetera. And Miss Piggy says, "Why are you telling me all this?" And she says, "It's plot exposition. It has to go somewhere." And I just think that is so true. It has to go somewhere. And putting it in the mouth of a supporting character frequently is the way to go. They can really fulfill that. I'm sorry, John. John, what'd you say again?
I said I'd like to zigzag off the point you just made, though. Sometimes the great thing a supporting character does is all showing. And a couple of favorites, the Earl Finn Robin Hood, Much the Miller's Son, actually does half a dozen. He gets more, for whatever reason, the screenwriters loved him or something, loved the actor or something, but he actually gets more to do in that version of Robin Hood than Little John or Friar Tuck or any of the familiar people. and he is brave and smart and capable and does what, I mean, very, very worthy of being one of the merry men. But the actor playing it is a short little ugly man. And it immediately brings this idea that Robin Hood is the guy for the people.
Mhm.
I mean, there's the common people doing a whole bunch of heroics along the way very quietly, and having his own little romance with the maid of Maid Marian, and stuff like that. And that's and it's all action. You don't get a bit of no exposition, no spoken exposition. He just does these things.
Right. Robin Hood is really interesting because it's full of supporting characters. And unlike a lot of stories written at that time, I guess it's Scott's version that we mostly know, in the 1800s, people, they're used to having the hero take all of the attention and all of the screen time. And with Robin Hood, that's always been an ensemble cast from the very beginning, with Little John and Friar Tuck and Will Scarlet and Maid Marian and the sheriff and stuff. And speaking of the sheriff, how do you guys feel about villains? As villains are obviously supporting characters. Sometimes they're main characters, but there can also be villains who are supporting characters. How do you feel about that, Suzanne?
Well, if your villain isn't functioning as a supporting character, what's your villain doing?
Right.
I was thinking of, going back just a sec to Robin Hood, I was thinking about how the supporting characters of Robin Hood are very much also part of the world building. It's not just about the plot, it's about showing sort of the world around them. And I think, villains, that's one of their function, is to show the side of the world, the side of the whatever's going on, that the main character is in opposition to. But you need that viewpoint too in there somehow, which makes them, they're totally supporting characters. And the problem is when your villain is more likable than your main character, and you're like, damn it,
interesting, just more interesting, more complex, and with a much better. Sometimes, and I can't think of an example, but sometimes it's obvious that the writer really, really, really loves the main character, but is more like the villain actually.
Right.
They wish they were like. It's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. And the hero sometimes has a difficult job because they've basically got a hero or heroine. They basically got to play it straight, and they don't have a lot of latitude for humor or for fooling around. They just they're supposed to stick to the job and do what they're supposed to do, and brave, upright, strong, bold, intelligent. These things are not nearly as fun as the gossipy little old woman or the clumsy old man, the dotty professor or whatever. Those are much more interesting simply because they have much more latitude of action, I think. So, yeah, Suzanne, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think that's very much it. Is you can make a really two-dimensional cardboard villain, and then your story's never gonna really rise to where it can. But if you make a really interesting villain who has really sort of believable reasons for doing whatever they're doing, but then you have your hero who's constrained by their job being to go and stop this, the weight of sympathy of your reader might be towards the more interesting person, but your cast of supporting characters sort of weighs the scale along with the hero on that side. So your supporting characters can sort of add some of the empathy and the sympathy and the good cause stuff, and the humor, and people who are more relatable that can balance out a really good villain.
Right. Well, John had mentioned Star Wars before, and I think that's a perfect example of that. I mean, Luke versus Darth, no question who's the more interesting character there. And Luke can just really come across as whiny. I want to go to Taji Station, etc. But he's saved by all the other people on his side. He's also got, Han Solo on his side, and C-3PO and R2-D2 and Leia, and all these interesting people on his side, and they can help round out Luke and make you glad you're on his side as opposed to Darth Vader's. Betsy.
See, I don't agree with this, but it may be that I read and write a different kind. I don't think. Why I think this may be why it's so hard for me to say which is the supporting character and which is the main character. That I get far more interested in characters that can't really be identified as heroes or villains, but are folks like the rest of us going, oh my God, as we bungle our way through our lives, being sometimes heroes, sometimes villains. And do you see what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, I think, well, I mean, we're using those words, but I'm not sure, I'm not sure the roles are as restricted as we're making it sound.
They start feeling cardboardy when I know that this is the hero and this is the villain. It's like, well, that doesn't match my life.
It's a good term in theater directing, when you're trying to sort out, how the story is going to go on the stage. Character of influence. If you have both a strong hero and a strong villain, and lots of plays do, that because plays are intrinsically simpler than fiction because they have so much less room to work in. But if you have a strong hero and a strong villain, one of the problems is what you've got is a ping pong game, and it can feel very arbitrary who wins at the end, and so forth. So a character of influence is a character whose change of heart or change of mind at a key moment changes the whole situation. Very often, turns it into whether it's going to be a comedy or a tragedy or whatever. Classic example. All right, kid, let's blow this thing and go home.
I'm sorry, say again.
All right, kid, let's blow this thing and go home. Han Solo's line in the first Star Wars movie.
Right.
The sudden thing that, oh my God, he came back.
Right. Han Solo is absolutely one of those characters.
That's a character of influence moment. The greatest character of influence moment in the movies, as far as I'm concerned, is Major Strasser has been shot. Round up the usual suspects.
Right.
And you even see Claude Rains take a pause. That's the moment when he's realizing, okay, the next thing I say decides who I'm with for the rest of the war.
Right. Yeah. Casablanca is just, it's an amazing movie, partly because I think it fits your criteria, Betsy, where you're not sure whether Rick is a good guy or a bad guy. And you're not sure right up pretty much till the end, right up till the very end, you think he may have betrayed, the husband and is going to zip off with Ilsa and leave the husband to die at the hands of the Nazis. And you think he's the hero, but you've also watched him let Peter Lorre die at the hands of the Nazis. And so you really don't know. And all of the characters around are like that. I mean, some are irrevocably evil, like Sidney Greenstreet, I guess, and of course the Nazis. But others like Louis are just, he's not good. But on the other hand, he's a man of his word. He does keep his bargains. And then he is capable of great things at the very end. Yes. So that's almost every character is somewhat ambivalent in that movie, and it makes it really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why another great westerns, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Yes.
John Wayne is a far more interesting character than anybody else in the movie, and he is stuck as the support. In every sense, that's a character who wants to be the leading man, but he's much better as a supporting character in that.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, Betsy.
Well, this kind of leads into the conversations that little short email conversations we were having before this panel, which is some people plan characters. I don't happen to do, I find them, they come, and I often do not know until I have written, sometimes to the end of, almost to the end of the book, what's going to happen. I mean, we're putting labels of good, evil, supporting character. You know, what do you do when you start writing and all of a sudden a supporting character takes off and becomes their own main character, or turns out to be much better than you thought, or far worse than you thought? Because if we're writing something that's real, then we will not know what's going to happen any more than I know what's going to happen next week in my life. I mean, it's the exploration into that yummy mess that is part of writing.
I think everyone has a different process. Maybe we should talk about how we come up with our characters and our with a focus on supporting characters. Suzanne, when you're constructing your characters,
I'm probably like the worst example of how to do anything ever. But it works for me, so that's what I do. But I'm a total pantser. For people unfamiliar with that definition, there's descriptions of people who are plotters, who do comprehensive outlines and they know exactly where they're going with stuff. And then there's the pantsers who are just sitting. I sit there and I'm like, la 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 la. I'm stuck. Something blows up. I'm stuck again. Add a character, you know. And then I get to the end and I have this glorious mess. And I usually have no idea where it was going to go or how it was going to end till I get to the end. And then I'm like, then I got to go back and fix it. So sort of first draft becomes one's outline in a lot of ways. But I throw in characters, and sometimes I name a character. And like in my second book, I had a character who was originally in the first draft, he was just going to be this really minor character. And I needed a name for him. And I named him Stanislaw Toscani. And then I was like, oh, that's a good name. I can't waste that name. I have to do more with him. So he ended up becoming a fairly central character to the plot of the book because I came up with a good name. And likewise, I had a character I needed a throwaway name for while I was writing, and I named him Durf. And then I was like, well, now he's Durf in my head, so now I have to kill him. So then he died because he had a stupid name. So for me, supporting characters, it all happens very organically. And then when I get to the end, I sort of go sort them out and figure out who's carrying their weight, you know, which two could just be one, which one is just annoying and needs to go. There's a lot of culling that happens
afterwards. Yeah.
But I get really attached to my supporting characters, and that's really dangerous sometimes in terms of coming up with a coherent draft.
Yeah. John, how about you? What's your process?
I'm a chaplainer rather than either a pantser or a plotter. Charlie Chaplin used to shoot a lot of scenes and then figure out how to causally relate them. You know, I mean, the plot came last, in effect, and you know that, and I think it's a marvelous way to work. It does mean it's taking me forever to finish novels, but you know, it's a fun way to work. And so a couple of tricks like that. One that I love is the double dichotomy. If you know you need a sizable supporting cast, then you draw a cross shape, right? And left and right sides of it are two sides of a dichotomy. Top and bottom are two other sides of a dichotomy. So you know you have a character who is a bad individualist, and a character who is a bad community member, and then you have good ones on both, or whatever axes you prefer. Old and young, just basic things there. And it gives you this interesting cast design because now you've got people in contrast. The people on the diagonals will usually not get along. And it's easy to form alliances on the other thing. And that gives you a lot to play with. My other favorite trick is when I know sort of what I'm going to use somebody for, I think, in this part of the plot, I give them a name that in some foreign language means the thing. I mean, I do basically Dickensian names. I just conceal them.
Only in other languages.
Yeah, and sometimes one memorable case, unfortunately, a guy who was a representative of the coming doom and chaos, I named Darsaj, and the audio narrator went and pronounced it Dark Age, blowing the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm the planner in this group, and I want to have a caveat for anybody watching. Every writer has their own technique of putting their stories together. No one is correct or incorrect. Whatever works for you is what you should do, and you shouldn't ever try to adopt somebody else's strategy just because you like their writing. That it doesn't necessarily work for you. I'm a person who does outline, who does plot heavily, etc. And I will usually, my characters come from what I need in the story. As an example, in Doomsday Book, Mr. Dunworthy needed somebody to talk to because I had a ton of plot exposition that had to get in there. I had to tell you about the plague. I had to tell you about time travel and how it worked and all the rules of it. I had to tell you all about the Middle Ages. I had to tell you all about how Oxford's bureaucracy worked. I had to tell you just 1,000 things. And he had no one to talk to. And so that put him in a really difficult position. So I said, who could he talk to? His best friend was busy with the pandemic in the hospital. His other friend was out at the dig. The two people that were there were morons, and no one in their right mind would talk to them. And so he was stuck. So I created, on purpose, a kid named a 12-year-old, because kids ask lots of questions, and there's lots of stuff they don't know without being stupid. I mean, if an adult doesn't know these things, then maybe they're not very bright. But if a kid doesn't know them, it's because he's a kid. So I made him a kid, and his main function was to do plot exposition for that book. And then I gave him other jobs because he was standing there, just like in a play. Sometimes they'll have a spear carrier, and they'll keep giving them little jobs, and they'll say, well, you bring the tray in scene 4, and you do this in scene 5, and you do this. And pretty soon they're a really well-rounded character. And Colin, by the end of the book, was actually a major supporting character, not a minor one, and certainly not just a plot exposition person. But he grew out of that rather than the other way around. I mean, I didn't have a character and then his functions grew. I had the functions, and then his character grew out of that. And I know writers that do it that way, and I know writers that do it the way Suzanne and Betsy do, and John. And it's really interesting how one of the things that fascinates me the most is when I read about how writers have done their work. You cannot tell from the finished product how they did it at all, unless it's bad. And then you know that they shouldn't have done it that way. But if it's good, there's no way to tell from the technique how they got where they were. Writers always seem to get to exactly the same place. So now, Betsy, you look like you had something to say.
Well, I want to address that question, but I also say, Suzanne, I have something for you when you dance yourself into a corner. One of my students absolutely painted himself into a plot corner, could not get out, and finished his flash fiction with the line, all the men exploded. Just put that in your holster. That might be.
I like that. Suddenly a meteor struck the earth.
Yeah.
I had my background is actually, I fell into writing completely accidentally on a dare from a friend. It was supposed to be a brief whim, and it sort of took over my life. But my background is I actually have a degree in sculpture. And one of the most valuable lessons that I took in college that is applicable to so many things is I had this professor named Pat Lash, who was fantastic. And she would do things like she'd have us put up our pieces, and then she'd bring in somebody blind to critique our sculptures, which was really interesting. But we had a live model, and we were doing clay figures from our live model. And I'd been working on this for, weeks. We'd let the model go, and then we'd put her back in the same place. It's not like we kept her hostage for 2 weeks. And I just the front half of the body looked great, and the back half of the body looked great, but it didn't fit, and I couldn't figure out. And after working on this and trying to, move a little clay here and move a little clay there, my professor came over and she goes, there's something wrong with that. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, and you can't find it. And I'm like, no. And she goes, okay, here's what you do. And she took out a knife and she cut my figure in half, balled up half of it, threw it in the bin, and goes, start that part over. And it was like gutting in the moment that it happened. But the lesson that I took from that, in terms of, if it doesn't quite fit, sometimes you have to do something fairly catastrophic to get back to a place where you can then finish the piece. And that's so true with writing too.
Yeah, I love, we just watched Stranger Than Fiction the other day. And I love when the author, he says, the professor says, you realize now the ending does not match the rest of the book. And she says, I know, but I'll just rewrite the rest of the book to match it. I was like, which sounds unbelievably daunting, but I was like, of course, that's exactly what you have to do.
Yep.
Once you've got the one piece right, then you can do the rest of it. Walter, where have you been?
I thought the panel was at 1. I apologize.
That's okay. Do you have anything to say about real quick about supporting characters?
Oh, sure, lots.
Okay.
Shall I just take up the last 15 minutes here? And
yeah, we got about 10, and we want to ask let the audience ask a couple questions. So go ahead.
okay, well, my favorite use for supporting characters is what they call shadowing, which is to say that you give your supporting characters a problem that resembles that of the main character.
Yes.
Okay. For example, in Hamlet, Hamlet has a couple of shadows. I mean, Hamlet's problem is that his father has been killed, and he has been disinherited. And so this happens also to Fortinbras, whose father was killed by Hamlet's father.
Right.
And he has a different solution to it than Hamlet does.
A better solution.
Yeah, well, a better solution.
More
for
practical
Fortinbras, certainly.
solution.
Yeah. And the other is Laertes, whose father is killed by Hamlet, and who sets out to get revenge and turns out to be doing exactly the wrong thing. The book that I'm working on right now, the hero has romantic problems, which for various reasons he can't solve, at least in the middle part of the book. And so I gave him a couple of subordinate characters who also have romantic problems, and they sort of foreshadow the options for
Right.
his own solution. I mean, one of
Right.
them ends happily, the other ends tragically, and there are various complications along the way.
Jane Austen does that all the time.
Of
In
course,
Pride-
yeah.
In Pride
Well,
and Prejudice,
all
the
fine writers
Lucy's
do it.
problem is how to make a good marriage that will satisfy society, but also make her happy. But throughout, there are all these other bad examples. Charlotte, who marries purely for the money and position to satisfy society. That's disastrous. Her father, who married purely for love. That was disastrous. That, they're scattered through are a whole bunch of people who made other choices and are great characters. She's wonderful at that.
Indeed, he is.
Yeah. Any other ideas? We talked about plot exposition and some of the functions that characters can fulfill.
I'm sorry, was that directed at me or?
Yes, Walter.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
we talked about plot exposition and counterbalance and narrating the story and
Right.
providing humor.
There's a certain art to having a minor character narrate the story. Dr. Watson.
Yeah,
you know,
we discussed
being a
Dr.
perfect
Watson.
example,
Yeah.
because Dr. Watson is just thick enough to ask all the questions that the
Right.
reader wants to ask.
Right, just as thick as the reader, as a
Yeah,
matter
well,
of
just
fact.
he is thick at the speed of plot. That's
Yeah.
and being a straight man like that is a real art. And I think Conan Doyle did Watson very well. So that's another one. And another one is just to add complications.
Oh, true.
To baffle the main character. Again, the shadowing, in Shakespeare, we've got two guys named Antipholus in the same play, and they're identical twins, but they don't know, each doesn't know the other exists, and they are constantly being mistaken for one another. And so, lively and humorous complications ensue.
Right. So, okay. So I just got a thing from the chat saying we have 3 questions in the Q&A. Okay. So Mandy, give us the questions.
All right. Has your main character ever been subsumed by a supporting character?
Show of hands. Anybody?
One of the best things that ever happened to me was it happened with A Million Open Doors. Originally, Imeric, who is a sizable supporting character in the final version of things, was the main character. He was boring, he was drippy, and he had a terrible tendency to become a Mary Sue for where I was in my life at that time. And there were a couple of peripheral, snot-nosed young kids who didn't know anything, who I had thought of as being possibly expository devices. And I picked one of them and said, okay, you be the main character. We'll tell it from your viewpoint. And the son of a gun went on to be the hero in 3 more novels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Suzanne, you said that it happened to you too.
It happens to me all the time, but it might be sort of the nature of pantsing. But with my first novel, when I started out, it was going to be a short story, and I had 2 characters. All I had for my idea was these 2 characters on essentially a cable car in space, talking. And my idea of who the main character was of the 2 of them was completely the opposite of how it ended up going. And it's interesting because now I have people going, I kind of wish you could have done something more with the other one too. And it's like, well, I had to kill one. But yeah, it happens to me all the time. And I'm pretty, I like the sort of the serendipitous decisions by whim. They don't always work, but I tend to trust when instinct says no, go with that person.
Okay.
Yeah,
Betsy.
there's what I call the Han Solo syndrome, because Han Solo's main job is to not take the action that seriously.
Yeah.
Because if it's all, the Force wants this and the Force wants this and the Force is compelling me to do this thing, then it can get pompous really fast. And Han Solo's job is to prick that pomposity.
Right.
And I think the problem with the subsequent trilogies is that there's no Han Solo in there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Betsy, did you have a comment?
I was kind of flashing back to writing style and how much that reflects one's personality. Definitely, I would say I was 75% pantser, Suzanne. But I'm also an off-trail hiker. I have no interest in hiking on trail at all. All the interesting stuff happens off trail. But when you're talking about secondary characters, very, very likely when you're hiking, as it were, in the literary wilderness, to come upon someone like, well, for me, Raim in the book Dark Heart, who became so interesting and so troubled that I had to write another novel for him, which is Road Souls. And I'm not sure. I wonder, I suppose that would happen if I were planning also, but maybe I would end up planning a series.
Okay, Mandy, was there another question? Do we have time for another question, or are we?
Yeah, I think we have a time for another question. This one was originally directed at Connie, but I'm going to open it up to everybody, which is, what is your favorite supporting character from your own work?
Oh, Betsy, go ahead.
Easy for me. 9, who is a 9-year-old, had two leading characters who were both intensely lying to each other. And 9 tells the truth. She's the kind of kid who looks at you and says, "You got snot hanging out of your nose." She's totally honest in a terrible way. But so she's my favorite. Probably.
Okay. John?
Oh, I like a lot of them. I'll just say Lenny from Directive 51, because he manages to accomplish vast amounts of plot purpose while being an interesting guy, and then his death makes everything interesting too. So,
Okay. John?
I'm going to say Betsy from Implied Spaces, because Betsy is my concession to the people who like stories about cute cats. And so Betsy is a cute cat, but she's also a talking cat, and she's also the avatar of an incredibly powerful artificial intelligence who has an agenda. She has adopted the form of a cute cat in order to convince the human who actually has control over the artificial intelligence protocols to give her perfect freedom.
Okay. Suzanne?
And he's not about to.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's fine.
Suzanne?
Had just had a book come out, this past week. I have a secondary character in that book who's an alien named Ignacio, and he's basically a big goofy Muppet of an alien, and he's disruptive, and he doesn't always understand things, and he's a troublemaker, and he was so much fun to write that he's like, right now he's like my favorite character. And so the next thing I write, I'll have a different one, but right now it's my alien Ignacio.
Okay. For me, I that's a really hard question, but I always like my kids. I love writing children, and because they're really interesting, and and they say things and do things that no adult would ever dream of doing, and therefore they're very freeing characters, and they're funny, and they're smart, way beyond the adults in the story always. And I would say probably one of my favorites is Maisie from Passage, who is dying, and who simply, she wants to look it square in the face, and she wants to talk about it, and she wants to talk about how she feels and what's going to happen, and all these very scary things. And the adults around her are single-handedly determined to avoid it, to evade it, to ignore it, to do all the different defenses. And she's facing it head on. And so I guess she's probably one of my favorites. So yeah, Mandy, and one last question, or are we done?
I think that's all we have time for. So thank you everyone so much for this great panel. Walter, thank you for popping in at the end there.
Yeah, I apologize. I can't seem to keep track of anything anymore. I've just been in isolation too long, and all time looks the same to me.
And as a plug and a reminder, Walter has a live panel at 6:30 p.m. today. So let's all make sure.
I thought it was at midnight.
I'm the one in the different time zone here. Come on.
Does anybody else have a panel? I have a panel at 5. Anybody else have another panel today? No. Okay.
I have another panel, but I have no idea what time it is your time.
Okay.
Well, the schedule is on our website. And before we cut out, just a reminder that we do have the silent auction going on our Facebook. So please check that out. There's some great signed books, one set by Connie Willis. So, if you're interested in getting that, please check it out. And also you can get t-shirts through our website. So even though we're virtual, we're still selling t-shirts. So thank you everyone, and stick around. Our next two panels are science related. So that should be fun.
All right. Thanks so much. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Take care.
Great. Sorry, I didn't
See
get
you all,
to see
however
you,
briefly.
Walter.